got one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
I will be back live this coming Wednesday, January the 4th. Tune in to last Friday's rebroad. Media likes to do their, best of 2016. I'll cover a couple things that I've seen through 2016 that I think were in a way funny and sent a message too at the same time. We'll cover that. I also want to go ahead and dive into a Ron Paul Liberty Report. And this is something I've talked about for a while. Government-backed student loans. I've talked about that a little bit on the side, but it goes along with the whole college thing. My outlook has been that college has been very watered down, where everybody goes to college, except college doesn't help everybody get a good job. In the meantime, they acquire this debt, which is actual debt that they owe to the taxpayer, which, again, not all of them does college help them with a job. There's a lot of college graduates that end up working alongside high school graduates. It doesn't always equal success. And then when they are a taxpayer at that very low paying job, because, well, that college degree really actually didn't help them, this is more debt acquired. And then on top of it, the government-backed student loans have drastically inflated the price of college. And Ron Paul covers a lot of that in this Ron Paul Liberty Report. So we'll go ahead and dive into this.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good to see you, Dr. Paul.
I saw an article today on Zero Hedge having to do with education, and we've talked about education before, but this was interesting because, the question is will our kids and the young people now find it worthwhile to go to college? Some people argue in the case that you shouldn't go to college, but I can't see how that would work. But there's something wrong with our college for people to be so disgusted. And this story on Zero Hedge came out. It says college student earns a a 4.0 GPA, and he drops out. He says they're being scammed, and that is pretty serious. He quoted, one engineer student that said that he went to 5 years to get his engineering degrees, and he went to and got his job. In the first 30 days, he learned more on the job than he did in 5 years. And I'm afraid there's a lot of other people like that. They're not getting it, but this is an economic issue. It's a political issue. It's a welfare issue. How did we ever get to this point where there's a massive amount of debt? The students own this debt of $1.23 trillion, more than credit card debt. And quite frankly, I don't believe it's going to get paid and what's going to happen. But it's a big problem, and it will be defaulted on, I'm sure. But the big question is, how do you do it, and who should get bailed out, that sort of thing.
And they're in some ways they're being treated as consumers, pseudo-consumers. They're forced to pay a certain amount of money for a degree, but they're not treated like consumers in that they have choice. They're forced to take classes that really don't have anything to do with things that they're interested in or things they want to do for a job. If you're going into the sciences and you're forced to take a bunch of PC courses that don't relate to you or maybe even contradict your values, and then they force you to pay for it, it's almost like Obamacare.
Well, the saying goes, if you subsidize something, you get more of it. But if you subsidize bad education or encourage bad education or you encourage debt, things get much worse. So if you look at the inflation rate of college education, what the professors make, how much the students have to pay, and how much money they have to borrow, it's just outrageous. Then you add it into the factors you were mentioning, that the kids don't get the right education. But hardly is the solution, well, we need to get rid of our universities. That doesn't make any sense. But I know one thing that I think we should do is get the university or get our federal government out of the business of subsidizing and pushing this problem and getting involved everywhere from the social studies and the political correctness and progressivism. We have to get the government out of it, because this wouldn't have happened. There wouldn't have been this much debt. Of course, if there hadn't been a Federal Reserve System, they always have to have easy credit. Oh, yes, they need it. We're going to take care of all these students that can't afford college. Of course, now they can't afford it because the price is up, and that was created by government, the guaranteed loan programs and what the Congress does, along with, the Federal Reserve creating the credit, sort of like the housing bubble. The housing bubble was created where we have to give poor people houses, and we have housing programs and have mandates that they have to make bad loans. And all of a sudden, there's a bubble out there. And guess who suffered the most? The people who were supposed to have a house, and they lost their house and they lost their job. And the people who made these loans and the big corporations and the mortgage companies, they're the ones who end up getting bailed out.
And if you look at, I was looking at something that Gary North wrote a few years back about the spiraling costs of education. He had a couple of interesting statistics. In 1971, it took 13 weeks of paychecks for a median income household to pay for a year at Harvard. If you work 13 weeks, that would be the equivalent of a year's. Now it would take an entire year of median income paycheck to pay for 1 year of Harvard. That's a huge inflation in cost.
And that, of course, is created by the inflation, but it's also combined with a lousy education. The whole thing. They go and they don't learn. I don't think they learn good history. I don't think they learn a good economic policy. Matter of fact, most professors teach the economic theory that debt is not that big a problem. Debt is okay because that means that people are spending money and they're feeling good, and only spending drives the economy, not working hard and saving and let people use that capital in a market way. No, they're not talking about just spend, borrow money if you have to, and liquidate the debt later on, or don't worry about it. And so that's what they teach these young people. So their economic teaching is bad. And like that one student who said he was there 5 years, they didn't teach him anything about engineering and had to learn it on the job. So it's not very enticing. It's terrible for people to make up their minds. What are they going to do? Now, this guy has to be brilliant. He gets a 4.0 GPA, and he says, I've had it. this is a waste of time. And for some of the very brilliant people, it is a waste of time. But it's been made much worse because of the system. There's a lot of people who, can't just quit school and go out and start a business or take a job at McDonald's and thinks he's going to own a franchise someday. It's not quite that easy. The mess has to be cleaned up, but that's going to be easier said than done because you have to get rid of these programs. I mean, this is the problem. I want to read a statement on the whole principle of a guaranteed student loan and how unethical it is and how foolish it is and part of an economic system that gives us grief all the time. It says the guaranteed student loan program. If a borrower defaults on a guaranteed loan, the federal government pays the bank and takes over the loan. Good for the bank. The federal government pays approximately 97% of the principal balance to the lender. At that point, the federal government owns the loan and the right to collect payments on the loan. Well, I was reading some of the advertisements that are still on the internet. Come in, no down payment, no payment for so much longer. And, all these things, guaranteed this and that, they're still pumping it up like they do in houses. They're back to, pumping up that, not much easier to get, a mortgage. But here it's still being done. But this could not happen without government rules and regulations and emphasis and these programs, and then just having somebody over here that'll print the money for them. And nobody seems to understand that has a lot to do with bureaucracy, individuals not getting taught in school, the quality of education is down. So it's a miserable system. And like I said, it's not going to be easy to say, well, okay, if you agree, just drop out and read on the internet. You can get an education, which they can for some people. But I've always believed, governments to some degree has always been involved in our education throughout our history. It was usually local. And if something is local, like a community college or something, we happen to have a pretty darn good community college here where Dow Chemical and a couple other chemical companies, they have an influence. They donate money and they need people interested in chemistry and engineering and welding. And that school produces, percentage-wise, I think more people that can go out and get a job than some others. But if you go to some of these fancy universities, they're into political correctness, cultural things, and what I don't understand, maybe you have a thought on this, is why do the trustees go along with this when they're demonstrations and they're so outrageous? Demonstration. A lot of it's done based on fake stories and everything. It seems like, the presidents of the university are, yeah, this is great stuff. We like this. And it's just so destructive to the environment. And the trustees, they hardly say anything. When the trustees get excited? When their football team isn't winning. So indirectly, because of this money flowing into college, it sort of helps the athletic department too. But they're more concerned about the athletic department than they are about a good education.
Well, take University of California, for example. Once was a shining light of university systems. Now the chancellor is Janet Napolitano, a failed bureaucrat. And, my old alma mater, Berkeley, a couple of months ago was in the news because students of a far left-wing group blocked Sather Gate, and they blocked the entrance to the classrooms. And they said, white people cannot pass. And only people of color could pass through. And you saw this line of white people sort of snaking along, going around the back. I mean, this is the kind of foolish things that people are paying thousands of dollars for.
And this has been going on a while because even several decades ago, an Austrian economist I knew well, Hans Sennholz, was taught for many, many years at Grove City College in Pennsylvania, a small little college, and they were very, very principled. They would not take any money from the government. But then on occasion, a student would come in and have a loan coming from the government. So the government comes in because there was this loose attachment, and they wanted to regulate the whole college and tell them what you had to do and be politically correct and have these courses. And they finally, stuck to their guns on principle. But there's just a few little colleges have done that. Most of them succumb. We need the money. Yeah. We need the money. We'll go along with it, and we'll run our courses. And that's true, of course, in public education too. K through 12. Core, the Common Core, and this thing, it's all coming, from the government, and they have the same problems there.
You said something before we started today that astounded me. It was about the government going after once they own the loan, going after the people.
Yeah.
And how long?
I couldn't believe this. They are now garnishing Social Security checks. This program's been going on a long time. I think in the 70s they started all this, and it was doing so much good, helping people. But now it's exploded, and find out, they don't always pay this money back, and but the banks get But just think of all those years they're on Social Security now, and the government, here they are. They've given them all this money. They've run up all this debt. And now, I wonder how they ever contributed to Social Security, if they owed all that debt. So here they come along, they're getting Social Security benefits, and they're garnishing in order to take it out of this pocket and put it in this pocket. And sometimes some very innocent people get penalized on this, because I have met, I think we even had a student on our program once where she was working very, very hard to pay off the debt and felt a moral obligation, didn't quite understand the mechanics of all this. So there are, a lot of students who have, and a lot of students who still want to. But I think, the momentum is out there now to default and, excuse the debt. And that's going to go on. And I think that I don't think this $1.2 trillion is going to be paid. Just our national debt isn't going to be paid. It has to be defaulted on. Most of the time, countries default by, printing a lot of money and paying it back with, 10 cents on the dollar or something. But it really has contributed to a lot of miserable education that we have today.
Some of it is a perception issue. There has been the perception for decades that if you want a better life, you go and get a college degree. And that was your ticket to, a white-collar job and a better life. It's different, I think, in many European countries. And I may have said this on the show before, but I once had a meeting with the CEO of Credit Suisse. And Switzerland is fantastic with their apprenticeship programs. And he was a young guy at age 18 after high school. He didn't want to go straight to college, so he got himself aligned with an apprenticeship program at the Credit Suisse Bank. And he learned college at the same time. Simultaneously, he went to classes, but that wasn't the focus. It was learning the trade of banking. And he worked himself all the way up to being CEO, and then he went back and got his degree. So,
I think one of the big problems now is we see these problems cropping up on this attack on free speech and affirmative action and all. And the momentum of cultural Marxism, it seems so irrational on what they force these students into. And this sometimes seems so bizarre that it's almost like it's deliberate. Don't they understand that if we do this is going to cause chaos? But some people do believe, and I wonder about it, that it's not just an accident, that they sort of thrive on chaos, being disruptive. And when you think a Soros-type individual, I think he thrives on this because the cultural Marxists would like to undermine the system. They like one world government, and they like to disrupt. And they're just think of the migration problems. They get behind the wars. I mean, you don't hear many university professors condemning it. You don't hear the media condemning it. And yet it's been persistent wars, steady wars, in the Middle East. Then lo and behold, there are migrants. And then, okay, well, we'll use them. We'll boost them up. And all of a sudden, there's a migration of individuals who are 18 to 25 males, even though there's a lot of other people there that are suffering truly from all this. So these people are pushed over. And look at what's happening in Europe. And look at what's starting to happen here, too. I think the assimilation here is not so quite as bad, but it's still potentially, a real dynamite problem. And obviously, a lot of Americans were unhappy about it because some of the statements that Trump made, it was appealing to them because of this disruption. But the universities have to assume some responsibility for this. But I don't hear a whole lot of talk from the trustees, and they just keep pumping money into this, and then they never say, why are we doing this? I imagine because this is subsidized and everybody had this idea you have to have a degree, that probably the universities, there might be twice as many people getting a degree, and it turns out the degree doesn't mean much. And that to me, I think, is the biggest problem. And of course, in a free market, a free society, I mean, in our early history, most of the universities, I went to a school, as well as my brothers did, to a school that was church-oriented. It was started by a church. And there were universities like that, and they're still sort of attached, but they're always taken over by the government one way or the other.
It's worrisome, but as you say, if the market does take over, there will be alternatives, and maybe the internet will provide more alternatives for people who don't want to spend $200,000 on a useless degree.
Boy, that's for sure. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. My guess is that this problem with our universities, the poor education, the high costs, and the excessive debt, it's going to be here for a little while, and because it is ingrained in a system that's been around here and a reflection of a progressive era that's been going on for 100 years, but it's out of control in education, at least for the 30 or 40 years. Matter of fact, it was in the Eisenhower administration when we had HEW come in, and it keeps getting worse and bigger. And I imagine it's just like so many other things that we'd like to end, whether it's the military-industrial complex or all the terrible things in foreign policy. I've always assumed that, we're not going to get sanity in Washington very soon, and we're not going to gradually work our way out of it because the politics of it are so difficult. But it'll end when we no longer can afford it. Right now, though, the world still loves our dollar, and as long as they do, we're going to have this free ride. But believe me, there's no time in history where fiat money, printing money endlessly, can make a country wealthy. And we already know about half our country is not as wealthy as the other half, causing this resentment that was reflected in the campaign. And until we understand that, we cannot solve our problem. If we don't understand that when the crash comes, we're going to be in a mess. But what we need to do is understand it. So when there is a major economic crisis and a bankruptcy, we know what we need to do. And what we need to do is a lot closer to what the founders were talking about than what we're finding out what's happening in our university by the progressivism and the subsidies coming from the federal government that controls our universities. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Check them out, subscribe. Now, that's a whole nother thing when we even start looking at the socialist rhetoric that is propagated in the college systems. Definitely when it comes to, the economic system, the political system, and, subsidizing college. And then on top of it, college professors promoting how government should subsidize much more. And then having a failed Keynesian economic policy and monetary policy that really, if you look at where our economy is right now, a lot of it is based on that. And I've said it before, and this does not apply to everyone, but there's a lot of degrees out there that aren't too difficult to get if you're halfway intelligent. And they are very common degrees. And you get these people that they feel, I've been through college. I deserve, a decent paying job. I went through this. Then they find themselves in a position again next to, a high school graduate that might have been in this field for 14, 15 years and has worked their way up the ladder. They sometimes find themselves working for those people. And they feel privileged when it comes to having that degree and the job. And I've said it before, I've found myself disliking the college graduate over the high school graduate for the simple fact the high school graduate has had to prove himself and has had to learn on the job and tends to know what they're doing, and they have a drive. They go, hey, I don't have a college degree, I have to work twice as hard. They already have that mentality. Versus a lot of the college graduates, at least, in the ones that get hired in the lower positions, that, they don't have some major degree. Like I've said before, there's some things that people should go to college for, and there's some things that I think is better off left learning, in an apprenticeship. College does not do anything to help. But these people tend to get fired quicker, and the saying that, everything that you can learn in college you can find on the internet for free rings true in a lot of circumstances, definitely business classes, things like that. And again, a lot of it also come from, on the job learning. You can go to college and learn sales, but a great salesperson isn't a great salesperson because they learned sales. There's many people that haven't learned sales in a college environment, learned it in the work environment, and they're great. So, becoming a doctor, well, you can learn a lot on the internet, but there's things that maybe you wouldn't want to operate on someone unless, you had professionals that know how to operate and are helping you along the process. Maybe that's not something you want to learn on the internet. So, college shouldn't be for everyone. And the subsidy thing is something that kind of prevents that reality from sinking in, because, well, it gotta have a college degree and then you're guaranteed a loan. Okay. I'm gonna dive into another clip here. just restarted my browser. This isn't working out too well here. Okay, here we go. This from We Are Change. Why Trump and Putin are expanding military nuclear power. Here we go. Or nuclear weapons, should I say.
This video, we're going to talk about the latest comments made by U.S. President-elect and very similar comments made by Russian President Vladimir Putin about nuclear weapons on the world stage. We're going to talk about the repercussions of these comments and also the current situation, ugly diplomatic situation between Russia and the United States. Now, just moments ago, Donald Trump has tweeted, quote, "The United States must greatly strengthen and expand its nuclear capability until such time as the world comes to its senses regarding nukes." Now, many people are pointing to that last bit in that statement saying the world comes to its senses, pointing that it was an external factor, an external force that made him come to this conclusion and justifies the expansion of nuclear capabilities by the United States. Now, these statements by Donald Trump came right after Vladimir Putin made very similar statements after meeting with his defense ministers. Vladimir Putin said that he would expand not only his military capabilities, but also his nuclear capabilities. Donald Trump then met with his foreign policy advisors and then sent out that tweet. As we know, Donald Trump does believe that the Russians have more capabilities than the United States does when it comes to nuclear weapons. And the Russians have been modernizing and expanding their military. Many military experts are saying that Russians were using the current conflict in Syria as a live fire training drill. And even the Russians admitted themselves that they were able to test 162 new modern armaments because of the Syrian conflict. The Russians have launched 71,000 strikes in Syria, killing 35,000 rebels and radical Islamic terrorists who are going after Bashar al-Assad inside of Syria. The Russians have also publicly said that they have successfully tested a missile that could cripple U.S. satellites. Now, why did the Russians come out publicly with this? Why are they posturing so strongly with their military and their capabilities against the United States right now? Well, of course, Barack Obama and this current establishment and administration is not helping the situation. As we know, right before Barack Obama went on vacation, he vows retaliation against the Russians for allegedly hacking the U.S. elections. Now, as we know, the Russians came back with a response saying, you know what, show us the evidence. Shut up or show us and prove what you're saying. But if you're really in tune with what's happening around globally, especially with foreign policy all around the world, you would understand that everyone spies on everybody. The United States, including Barack Obama, spies on Angela Merkel. The Germans spy on the United States. The Russians spy on Germans spy on them. The Chinese spy on everybody. It's a whole new cyber warfare that we're dealing with, and we're seeing a soft kind of war being engaged even with allies online digitally, because information is key in war, in conflict, in foreign policy. The more you know, the better you're off in making decisions, and that's why governments spy and hack each other all the freaking time. So this is nothing new. But the United States came back and issued more new sanctions against Russia. Sanctions that have been crippling the Russian economy and the rupee. And the Russians are, of course, very angered by that. And because of that, the Russians are saying that they are freezing off any ties with the United States and keeping communication at a bare minimum. We're getting reports that nearly all levels of dialogue with the United States have been frozen from the Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov. This is what they're saying publicly. They're saying, we no longer want to talk to you. Obviously, many diplomats from the United States in the United Nations have been pointing their finger at Russia for human rights violations inside of Syria. But what we're seeing is even our strongest ally in the region, one of the strongest, Turkey, who is a part of NATO, turned their back on Obama and the United States and have aligned themselves with Russia. And we have seen Turkey just launch an offensive inside of Syria that killed over 1,000 terrorists when they went after ISIS. Again, you have to understand the previous situation was the United States with Turkey financing, funding, supplying, aiding ISIS and radical Islamic terrorists inside of Syria. And now the Turks have turned around that policy and they're with the Russians to get rid of those rebels and to decide the future of the Middle East, the future of Syria with Russia, with Iran. And we're seeing the United States being excluded from this major decision as we're speaking right now. The Russians, Iranians, and Turkish government forces are sitting down at the table deciding what happens next, while the horrible U.S. foreign policies that escalated this conflict in grand proportions, with so many people saying actually created this horrible situation inside of Syria, they're excluded. They're no longer treated as even worthy to talk to. Trump's statements are extremely important, and so are Vladimir Putin. Will this situation calm down when Donald Trump takes office? We will only see. And to get that news, stay here, subscribe to this YouTube channel. You got to hit the bell button because of YouTube's stupid algorithm now. But subscribe to this YouTube channel. We're going to be up to date on the latest foreign policy news, keeping you in the know of what's happening all around the world. And we can only do that because we are beholden to you, because we are financed by you on resources like patreon.com/wearechange. Consider making a donation, consider being a contributor, and consider voting with your dollar, spreading information and news that the people need to hear, not this other bullcrap garbage where they're talking about airplanes and getting kicked off of airplanes and all this other malarkey bull hooey that has no relevant care in your existence. These two super global world powers talking about expanding their nuclear capabilities. Yeah, that's news.
We Are Change. We Are Change on YouTube. WeAreChange.org. Subscribe on YouTube. Now, a lot of talk has been on nuclear powers lately because, well, a lot of people have also claimed, this seems like an Cold War here. But I look at it more like we've been in a world war for a while, and a lot of it just hasn't been playing out militarily. Most of it has not been militarily. And when you see the amount that has been, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, you start seeing the bigger picture. You always know that military comes after the fact. So what's been done behind the scenes, hacking, all this, we've known about the hacking for a very long time. Remember the movie Hackers that had Angelina Jolie in it? Hacking was something that was known to be able to be done. It's been around. But now all of a sudden it's a big thing. Well, it's because, world powers are fighting each other right now. And they want control of the grid. They want control of information. They want control of the propaganda, so they can fight this world war. And I think they kind of ignored the internet to an extent for a while. For the past, decade, they've been paying pretty good attention. But there for a while, they ignored the internet. And what grew out of that was the ability for the information to spread, the ability for alternative media to pop up, left, right, center, libertarian, socialist, alternative media, even party, you know, backing alternative media, people that back the GOP, back the Democrats, they are for the party, have started to, you know, battle with mainstream media. Then you have conspiracy theory, you know, the conspiracy theorists, which has been a term used to a big extent to go after libertarians. Some of that because there are conspiracy theorists. But conspiracy theorists, in a way, it's become a dirty word, but it really shouldn't be, because there are conspiracies out there. You know, people get charged with, you know, conspiracy. You've ever heard conspiracy to commit? Oh, yeah. Theories are a lot of times what the prosecution uses to get someone convicted, because they don't have absolute proof, that 100% evidence, because we tend not to need that anymore. Just enough coincidences that the jury goes, I think you did it. So that would be a conspiracy theory too. This is our theory on why and how he killed, you know, so-and-so. He committed conspiracy to commit murder, you know. Conspiracy and conspiracy theories can be relevant, but it can also be a lot of hoopla. And at the same time, that word has been used to label a lot of alternative media, and now it's being used in a different term, fake news, to try to battle alternative media. And I think it's propaganda or the search to be able to propagandize any media that people get access to. And I think internet control and Obama giving the internet away to the United Nations is part of that. We should be fearful. And what Facebook, Twitter, and others are saying that they're going to do to please, you know, all these other people is to silence fake news and allow others to dictate fake news, like Snopes. Really? They are not the authority on anything. A lot of what they've claimed has been debunked. So again, who is the real news? That kind of takes me to one thing. This from rare.us. And here's something from 2016 that was kind of a pleasure to see. And this article, Rand Paul's Festivus tweets are absolutely savage this year. And as long as this doesn't freeze up on me, I'll be good. Each year he's been in office, Senator Rand Paul has taken to Twitter for annual Festivus airing of grievances, a tradition for the made-up Seinfeld holiday. Says here, Senator Rand Paul, good morning, Seinfeld fans, and happy Festivus everywhere. Today I'll have my annual airing of grievances. Join me here throughout the day. This year's airing by the senator has been especially brutal. Here's Paul on the Trump cabinet. On the media and fake news, Festivus is real media, so don't try to fact check it. And Onion is more accurate than Brian Williams report. New administration is looking good. Haven't seen this many billionaires in one place since I staked out Bilderbergs with Alex Jones. Good times. On potential Supreme Court picks, Senator Rand Paul. On the positive note, since that exchange at Cory Booker and I have worked on many criminal justice bills, proving Festivus brings us all together. My other colleagues at Senator Mike Lee and Ted Cruz are rumored to be on the Supreme Court shortlist. Survivor CBS is going to be so nerdy this year. On fake news. Hello again. I hope everyone is having a happy Festivus. It's once again time for my annual airing of grievances. On the media and fake news, Festivus is... Oh, I never covered that one. On wasting government spending, I've only just begun. I'll be back to talk waste, more government grievances, and non-binding resolutions against my Senate colleague. What do sea monsters, a superhero cartoon in Pakistan, and gambling habits of Ugandans have in common? It's time for more airing of grievances. Those are just a few examples. Our hard-earned money is wasted every day while our citizens, vets, and infrastructure suffer. We've got a lot of problems with how our tax dollars are spent, and you only heard about some, but I'm not done yet. And there's some graphics you can check out. This again is at rare.us. Representative Dave Bratt enjoyed himself. If you want to see some of the ways our federal government wastes tax dollars, take a look at Rand Paul's airing of grievances. Rick Perry was not spared. I know I said a lot about Ambassador John Bolton, so you're probably expecting me to say something nice for the holidays. Nope. My favorite cabinet pick is what's his name? It's that guy who... Come on. Don't freeze up on me now. This is why I get tired of people putting all these ads on their websites. Way too many ads. You got so much running on my computer that these ads just start weighing down and crash browser. Again, you can check that out at rare.us. Okay. We're getting close to the top of the hour. Don't forget to go to ucy.tv. Click the Amazon button down at the bottom. You know, you'll get some money maybe, or some gift cards, of maybe a Visa gift card or something. You want to buy something on Amazon, shop through ucy.tv. And when you do that, UCY gets a little kickback, help cover operating costs. And at the same time, you get the same great deals, same great shipping rates. and it's no extra cost to you. It's just a way to also help UCY cover operating costs. So shop Amazon through UCY.tv. Okay. I had one more clip I wanted to get to. Actually, I had two, but I don't think I'll have time for the last one. Now, oh, come on. Sorry, guys. Of course, it wants to screw it up here. Okay. With all the talk of Aleppo and, Syria, and I think Syria has been one of the scars on 2016. And then we get the propaganda from the mainstream and our government on what they want us to know and believe is going on in Syria. And really now openly talk about Assad's got to go, but that's the problem. We're trying to overthrow government. That's none of our business. Definitely when Syria wasn't guilty for trying to expand its borders, we shouldn't be in charge of, overthrowing the government. I think that's really up to the people of Syria, not us. On top of it, I believe that there was probably some type of Western involvement in stirring up what they characterized as a civil war. Many people have said there is no civil war. The rebels are foreign fighters. But again, what's really happening? Ron Paul talks with Vanessa Beeley about Aleppo and getting real news from Aleppo with Vanessa Beeley. So let's go ahead and cue that up.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Well, very good. Daniel, we have a special guest today, and somebody you have visited with in the past, and she is calling in from Aleppo.
Wow.
So this is on the scene reporting. This is fantastic. Her name is Vanessa Beeley, and she's a journalist at Travel, and she's independent, but she's also willing to tell the truth, which makes her unique among journalists and why we are delighted to have her on the program, because that's what we specialize in, is trying to seek out the truth and sort out all the fiction and all the fake stories. But no fake stories today. Vanessa, welcome to our program.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Paul. And just to let you know, I actually returned from Aleppo last night. I'm now back in Damascus, but I was in Aleppo for 3 days.
You're in Damascus, okay? That's pretty close. I understand that country is not all that big. That's probably like you're still in Texas, when you go there. Well, anyway, we know that you've been there a while, and we know that you're one of the rare, if not the rarest, individual who will go into a situation like it was in Aleppo. Actually, I think you were in eastern Aleppo, and we're real interested in that. Our audience is very interested in this, to getting some real news and real facts. So if you could give us an update about what you did last couple of weeks and exactly what's going on in Aleppo, because most of what we're reading now in our press is the evacuation. It's on again, off again. How are we going to protect these people, and who's on whose side, that sort of thing. So if you could give us an update on that, I think that'll be well appreciated.
Sure. Basically, I spent 3 days in, as you said, East Aleppo, in the all the areas that had been liberated, the old city in Aleppo, the area of Hanano. We went to literally just 2 or 3 days after its final liberation, and so we spoke to civilians in that area, literally who were finally liberated from the various terrorist factions led by Nusra Front, but including factions like Nour al-Zinki and Ara al-Sham. Those two, of course, have not been designated terrorist groups by the United States, despite Nour al-Zinki having beheaded the 12-year-old Palestinian boy, Abdullah Issa, a few months ago. But those were the main groups that were embedded in East Aleppo and basically imprisoning the civilians. Everybody that we spoke to in those two areas, or who had managed to leave those two areas, told us of the atrocities that were carried out by these terrorist groups. One woman explained to us on film that they had, just before the liberation, they had basically imprisoned her 8-year-old daughter. Her eldest daughter was marked for rape. And literally the only thing that saved her was the day that the Syrian Arab Army liberated Hanano, was the day that the eldest daughter was going to be taken. The 8-year-old daughter died in prison, by the way. She also told us of the fact that it was the terrorists who were firing upon civilians trying to leave via the humanitarian corridors that were set up by the Syrian government and the Russians. And she told a woman in particular who was trying to escape, fell on the floor. She was starving. Another thing that was made very clear by all of the testimonies was that the terrorists had been receiving humanitarian aid, including food and medicines, but they'd been stockpiling it and basically rationing it to the civilians, also selling it at extortionate prices, most of the civilians couldn't afford it. This particular woman fell on her knees in front of the terrorists and she begged for food, and they shot her in the mouth. This was only one story of the horrendous atrocities that we were told about, of summary executions if anybody expressed any allegiance to the Syrian government or even to the Syrian army. Of the Syrian Arab Army, if they were discovered, they were summarily executed by the terrorist factions. Schools were taken over and used as weapon stores or as training grounds or Sharia courtrooms by the terrorists. In fact, we were approached by the director of one of the schools in Hanano, who very proudly said to us that only 3 days after the liberation, volunteers had cleaned out the school and they were going to welcome children back into it in the next sort of 24 hours. He showed us around the school. He showed us the Nusra flags that had been left there, the graffiti on the wall, the bullet holes in the courtyard where they'd been using it for weapons training, and also where the fights had taken place. Another thing to be very clear about, particularly in Hanano, the damage to the buildings was very much in line with ground fighting, not the aerial bombing that everybody has been amplifying, particularly in Western media. The buildings were not collapsed from the roof down, which is what you would see under a bombing campaign. They were basically holed by mortar fire or shell fire. And in fact, many of the civilians told us that the terrorists had been using chemical weapons on the civilians in West Aleppo, but also in East Aleppo. So these incredible testimonies that are pouring out with the liberated people of these areas are completely undermining the mainstream media narrative for the last 4 years. And I think that is why we're seeing at the moment this incredible, almost hysteria from Western media, sort of ramping up these incredible stories of Syrian Arab Army executions. Now, one very big point I want to make here, in Hanano in particular, we met with Syrian Arab Army soldiers who actually had family in Hanano. They hadn't seen them for 5 years during the occupation by the terrorist factions. These guys were extremely emotional to be able to, one, see their families again, but also to be able to return to their homes. So I would ask anybody to explain why Syrian Arab Army, exactly the same as the United States Army, who have family across Syria, would be executing their own family in the area that they grew up in, where they spent their childhood, where they went to school, where their families have lived all their lives. It makes, it's an obscene report that is being disseminated to the public at the moment. It's obscene.
Vanessa, Daniel has a question here for you.
I was going to say, Vanessa, this may shock you, but the news we're getting here from Western sources is slightly different than what you're telling us, as I would say probably diametrically opposed. They talk about death squads roaming around, army death squads, people desperately burning their belongings so they're not looted before they escape. What kinds of sources are they using? Where are they getting these stories from that really do dominate the Western coverage?
Well, I mean, this is another extraordinary thing, Daniel. We've covered the white helmets in the previous program. Very interesting. All of the civilians that I spoke to, both in Hanano and in Jibrin, which was almost the collecting center for people leaving the eastern districts to come and register to undergo a sort of a medical examination. None of these civilians had received any medical treatment from the terrorists in the 4 years of their imprisonment. This is a very important point to make, because we've heard time and time and time again about the last hospital, the last doctor, the last activist, the last everything. And the narrative has been very much the Syrian and Russian bombing of hospitals. But these hospitals, from all the testimony that we're receiving across all the eastern districts, were occupied by terrorist factions. They were used only to treat terrorists. No medicine was made available for the civilians, and no civilians were treated. Even one woman showed me a bullet that had gone through her hand and lodged in her hand and had caused an awful scar. And she said basically she'd never dared go to the hospital to be treated because she was so terrified of what the terrorists would do to her and her family had she gone. And this is only one of the testimonies. I have to stress this. It's one after another. And the very interesting thing, I asked all of these civilians if they knew of the white helmets, if they had come across them. All of them said no, they had never seen them. One person said to me, yes, he knew of the civil defense, but he said they were the civil defense of the terrorist groups. He said they didn't treat civilians. Now, Lizzie Phelan of RT interviewed civilians in the same areas as I did in the last few days, and she actually received testimony that the white helmets had actually left people under the rubble to die. And there was one man who told them that the white helmets had killed his daughter when he took her into the hospital. Now, none of these stories obviously have been fully corroborated, but when you're receiving 90% of the testimony is telling you that, one, the white helmets did not operate in eastern Aleppo, two, the hospitals were occupied solely and exclusively by terrorists and were only treating terrorists, and that medicines were, I mean, this reduces the mainstream media narrative, the UN narrative, and the US government and the UK government narrative down to absolute obscenity.
Vanessa, I want to see if I can get the picture here. The war's been going on a long time. We've been, the news has not been beneficial to the average person to understand this. You're describing a real mess over there and tragedy and a description of us not getting the message. But to me, a significant event has occurred. Aleppo has been taken over by the Syrian government. And of course, that indicates that our side, the American side, isn't doing so well. But how significant is this? Are you getting to the point where saying, you know, this is major, this is beneficial, this is the road to peace, this is we can look forward to it. Is this just a little blip going in the right direction, or is this a major change where you can expect significant changes throughout the whole country of Syria?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the victory of the Syrian government in liberating and retaking Aleppo is huge. Symbolically, Aleppo, for me, represented exactly what is happening in Syria as a whole. 75% of Aleppo in West Aleppo had been dehumanized, marginalized, and ignored by the mainstream media and by the Western governments. And the 25% of Aleppo, which was majority foreign militants and terrorist groups, was being amplified by the media and our governments. And this is exactly what is happening in Syria. The majority voice is being ignored in favor of those who are supporting U.S. intervention and U.S. Regime change objectives inside Syria. So the liberation of Aleppo and the unifying, again, of East and West back into one homogeneous city, and the repairing of links between East and West in Aleppo is huge. And it's a massive seismic paradigm shift, because it has exposed the Western media as the charlatans they are. It has exposed our governments for exactly the objectives that they have in Syria and how they're trying to achieve it. You know, we've seen the British, primarily British-funded shadow state project, particularly the White Helmets, being exposed again as frauds and liars and potential murderers from the testimony that we're getting. Right. This is enormous.
Daniel has a follow-up.
Yeah, this is something that unfortunately I'm sure you have to deal with. Dr. Paul had to deal with it for all the wars that he opposes. You know, and it's never asked of the mainstream journalists, but, you know, I do follow you on social media, and you do have, believe it or not, you have a lot of detractors. And they say that, you are Assad's...
She's doing her job right.
You're Assad's mouthpiece. You're doing the business of Assad. You're on his payroll. All of these sorts of things that are flung at people. What do you say to people who say that about you as a journalist? It's pretty unusual to have a journalist in the area.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as soon as an attack becomes ad hominem, I feel that they've lost the argument. Because if people are going to start using campism arguments, in other words, I'm Assadist or I'm Putinist or I'm Nasrallahist or whatever else I can think of, it's ridiculous. If I'm going to call myself anything, I'm a truthist. I'm completely self-funded. I do what I do because I believe in exposing injustice wherever it is. Now, people maybe don't like that. You know, it makes them feel threatened, and maybe they're projecting their own sellout to whatever faction that's involved in this regime change operation inside Syria. That's their problem. But as I said, as soon as it becomes an ad hominem attack, as soon as they attack me instead of attacking my arguments, instead of debating my conclusions, then they've lost the argument. So for me, again, this is an example. The more that they come at me, it's an example of the damage that we're doing. You know, the hyperbole is being exposed, and they are losing the war on all fronts. They're losing the war militarily in Syria. They're losing the war politically, diplomatically, and now on the propaganda front, they've completely lost it. We're going to see a complete shift. You know, we've had the attacks on the fake news, but we are actually exposing the fake news for what it is.
Well, we have a lot of work to do, but I'm glad to hear some of the optimism you have here, because that's our goal. But, you know, if you go and ask the average American on the street about Aleppo or Syria, they might know a little bit. There's a problem over there, but it's all Russia's fault. If the Russians had just stayed out, there wouldn't be a problem. There's very few. There's a growing number, and of course, we reach these people that it has something to do with America. But if you go on to the streets of Aleppo, what would the people say about Americans? Are they aware of the big picture, the big policy, and who the factions are? And what do they think of Americans? Do they know that we're part of the coalition that would like to and have been for 5 years trying to get rid of the current government of Syria?
Yeah, the majority of Syrians are very aware of the intervention policy of the United States. They are very generous in the sense that they consider that it is only the U.S. administration that is to blame. They don't blame the American people. And that is always made very, that point is made very clearly in the hospital. I actually went into Syria in July with the U.S. Peace Council, and they were all incredibly impressed by the hospitality and generosity that was accorded to them by the Syrian people, despite what the U.S. government is responsible for, the misery and suffering that it's inflicting upon the Syrian people. So from that perspective, there was a lot of optimism when Hillary Clinton was not elected, because I think there was a lot of fear that had she been elected, we would pretty much be going to war, or certainly we'd be way closer to the brink of it than we are at the moment with Trump. So there was a huge sense of optimism from that also. Just going back to the Russian perspective, let's be very clear here. Russia was legally invited into Syria by the elected government, unlike the United States that is intervening illegally and is carrying out war crimes, as in the bombing of the Syrian Arab Army soldiers in Deir ez-Zor a couple of months ago, for example. And Russia, I was in East Aleppo. I went to Jibrin, which, as I say, was the registration center for civilians leaving East Aleppo. I was allowed to go in and film in the Russian field hospitals that had been set up there by Russian medics to attend to all of the civilians that were coming in. And they said on average they were seeing about 150 a day with various injuries from unhealed, broken bones. I saw a young man in there who was emaciated, could barely breathe, and with skin and bones. And they were treating him so kindly. The humanitarian effort by Russia inside Syria is never, ever reported in Western media. It's extraordinary.
Vanessa, State Department spokesman John Kirby said, I think it was yesterday, I didn't see any celebration in Aleppo when it was liberated. I didn't see any pictures of it. Did you see any?
Of course I did. I mean, people were out on the streets, particularly after the old city was liberated. This was extraordinary. I mean, that night we actually got into a taxi and the taxi driver was crying. We filmed him. We actually interviewed him and he was weeping. And he said, this is, maybe this is an end to the hell that we've been living under. Because another point to make is that the terrorist factions funded by the United States coalition in East Aleppo were daily firing mortars and missiles and explosive bullets. It was happening when we were there in the area we were. The explosive bullets were hitting within meters of where we were staying, as were the mortars. And children, I mean, thousands of children have been eviscerated, mutilated, lost arms and legs as a result of these mortar attacks that, again, have never, ever been highlighted in Western media. And today I was told, it's unconfirmed reports, but I was told that in the area that has just been evacuated of the remaining militants in East Aleppo, they have found huge stores of missiles, including possibly Grad missiles. So again, this points to, the absolute hypocrisy of the United States, who has been arming these terrorist factions in order to massacre not Syrian Arab Army, which would be logical. If there's a civil war in Syria, you would expect these so-called rebels to be using these missiles against the Syrian Arab Army, but no, they're using them against civilians. I mean, this is. It's disgusting.
Vanessa, you've been involved in this for a while. I'd like to know a little bit about how you got involved in this type of journalism, this desire to get the truth out. Have you been doing this for a long time, or did you have an epiphany somewhere along the way? Tell us how where did you achieve this determination?
I grew up, my father was British ambassador to various countries in the Middle East. So I actually grew up in the Middle East as a child. And I obviously spent my life with him. And he was always, throughout his career, and even when he retired, working on behalf of the Palestinian cause. So about 4 or 5 years ago, having sort of studied his papers after his death in 2000, I decided to go to Gaza. I lived in Gaza during the 2012 Israeli bombing. I lived there again in 2013. And during that time, I also then developed the interest in what was happening in Syria. And it sort of snowballed from there. And I think that sense of wanting to expose injustice probably came very strongly from my father and has been part of my life, all of my life, but has been focused on the Middle East in the last 4 or 5 years.
Time yet, and I think Daniel has a short question, and then we'll be thinking about finishing up. Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, I was just watching a clip earlier today from Democracy Now!, which has been mixed at best on Syria. Let's put it that way. But they had a debate between Ken Roth of Human Rights Watch and Professor Stephen Cohen of New York University. Two very, very different perspectives. And it was a fascinating debate. But what Ken Roth said, I think, is what you and I heard when we had an interview together yesterday. We've heard it a lot, which is that the Russians and the Syrians have gotten together with the intent of bombing civilians in Syria. And no one has ever explained how that makes sense. If the Russian government just felt like killing a bunch of people, surely they could do it closer to home at a lot lower cost. So it just defies logic that this is the dominant theme in American thinking about Syria.
Well, exactly, Daniel. And if the Syrian government's intent were to bomb its own civilians, why is it not continuing to do that now that the militants have been evacuated? Instead, it's taken in around 95,000 civilians from East Aleppo in the last few weeks, all of whom have been registered, all of whom have been medically treated, all of whom have been either reunited with their families in West Aleppo or sent into the internally displaced people camps to be then moved on to housing until their homes can be rebuilt. I mean, we've seen, again, when I was in Aleppo, I saw tremendous projects going on to rebuild the areas that have been liberated almost immediately. We saw diggers and earth movers out clearing up the streets in Hanano. We saw the schools, as I mentioned, being opened again so children could get back into education, an education that they've been deprived of by the terrorist factions for the last 4 years. And across Aleppo and across Syria, we see this all the time. In areas where which have been liberated from terrorist occupation, we see massive efforts from the Syrian state to rebuild, to rehome. There's a reason that 90% of IDPs, internally displaced people, which is over 6 million, have headed for government-held areas. Now, if the government were to be bombing its own people, why is it then taking in the people that the U.S. claims it's bombing into government-held areas? Like, I mean, it sort of beggars belief. It so defies logic and rationale.
Vanessa, this has been great. It's so delightful to have somebody answering some of these fake news stories and getting some real news. And you may be the only one, if there are more, there aren't very many, to really get some news out here, which is trying to level with the people of the world, not just our audience, to level with people on what's going on. So we want to really thank you for this. But I want to ask you another one short question is, you said you're self-funded, and I don't know whether you take donations or not, but you're free to give an address out, and because I would encourage people to support your efforts, because if people want to deal with fake news, they need to help people like you to get the real news out. Could you give us a little information on that?
That's very kind of you, Dr. Paul. Yes, actually, I do have a donation button on my blog page, which is thewallwillfall.org. If people would like to donate, I mean, I literally do self-fund. I sort of gave up pretty much everything at the beginning of this year to be able to focus on doing what I do. Another thing that I'd like to point out, a very dear colleague of mine, another very brave journalist, Ava Bartlett, is currently touring the United States, speaking on her time in Aleppo and Syria, during this year. She's spent extensive time, as I have, in Aleppo and the rest of Syria. So if anybody is in the areas that she's speaking in, please do go and see her. She's also an amazing truth bringer.
Wonderful. And I'm sure Daniel will join me in this in thanking you very much for being with us and helping us get a message out, which we think is so important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you.
And I want to thank our audience for being with us today. I consider this a very important program because our goal is to get real news out there and try to counteract the mainstream media. But she gave us a lot of information about what's really going on in Syria, especially in Aleppo. And it's not removed. If you look at most of the news story, they come from Beirut. It's not that they might have a glimpse on what's going on in Beirut, but let me tell you, it's nothing like spending time on the ground in East Aleppo and talking to these people and sorting out who was doing the killing and the fighting and having an honest assessment. So I want to thank our audience very much for joining us today. And please come back to the Ron Paul Liberty Report soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Check them out, subscribe. And now, not saying that, Russia's right and everything. I don't think so. Russia should be involved, but at least they are allies with the Syrian government rather than just people that are funding foreign mercenaries, basically. Now, it's also important to point out that when you look at the whole situation, it's not that you should support Assad, but it's really important to understand that what he is doing leaves more people better off than the ISIS and all that. And, we keep saying, oh, we're fighting ISIS. We're only supporting rebel groups. Well, the rebel groups that tend out to be fighting with ISIS or are ISIS or a affiliate of Al-Qaeda ISIS. It's all the same. And it's just constant propaganda. Now, I'm not saying, again, that, all the news coming that's saying, maybe that Assad is, good or Russia is good. It's that who's supporting the side that's trying to win people over in that country. It doesn't seem that America is. Now, I've seen one mainstream media report, and I can't remember what broadcast it was on, but they were interviewing these kids, and I noticed that, well, they were all boys, for one. I didn't see any little girls. And the one boy basically said that we're fleeing with the rebels, and, I'll be back one day to wage war or something, on the killers of my family. And I'm thinking, it starts kind of clicking. I don't see any little girls. It's all little boys. I don't see women. It's rebel men with little boys. And I'm thinking, could this be they just take the boys to train them to be fighters, and, who really killed that little kid's family? Was it, Syrians or, the Syrian army or Russians, or was it the rebels that he was with? Then, went to another clip which showed a whole different area, like a little set up refugee area. It didn't look like the same place that the little boy was at, even though it kind of seemed like they were claiming it was. But then you seen all, women, men, boys, girls. It seemed like propaganda to me right off the bat when I started kind of analyzing all that. So, again, I'm not a supporter of any side, but the problem is our government's involved. And I don't want the government, in the name of me, out there being involved in this when I don't believe what they're telling me. Then, of course, you had that Berlin incident. Now you have London, this out of the sun.co.uk, London to be protected from terror attack by new €5 million ring of steel built around the city. Counter-terrorist specialists have put together plans for a secure cordon which would seal off key routes. A multi-million pound ring of steel could be built in London in order to protect some of the capital's highest skyscrapers from a terrorist attack. Man checkpoints, rising steel boards, restricted roads, and crash-proof areas among some of the measures proposed to strengthen the defense of London's square mile at a cost of €5 million. And then they have all the little blueprints of it, that were the area they plan on doing. We have governments that are involved overseas and, for Europe, nearby. And then they go, well, we have to take all the refugees. Well, the West tends to be supporting these radicals, so we also get some of the radical refugees. It becomes a thing that we've created a issue that now their answer is more police state. And you'll see that here in America. But their answer to it is not, we're doing something wrong by just bringing in waves and waves and waves of immigrants from areas that are radicalized to hate the West. It's that we need more of a police state. We need robo-cops running around everywhere. Stormtroopers. It's ridiculous, and it's typical of these governments. And it's funny, it tends to be all the Western governments. Kind of interesting. We have to understand, the circle that is an never-ending circle that we keep circling around right now. We can't continue to give up freedom. We're giving up freedom for the mistakes that they're creating which they have the solution for, and that's us to give up our freedom. Makes absolutely no sense to me. I think that since they made the mistake, maybe the elitists should get above their freedom because they made the mistake. But it's not a mistake to them. It's an agenda. You know, where's that anti-war left? Oh, don't worry, they're waiting. Donald Trump, will be in office here soon. They'll pop up out of the woodworks. But I don't think many of us will be fooled again to, join with them, even though you want to. But you were willing to do it this whole time Obama was president, but they weren't anywhere to be found. There were some, but very few, and half of them wouldn't ever work with a libertarian or anybody they consider right wing. They were strictly left. The other half never made enough of a fuss. But that's something that, libertarians, especially, people like Ron Paul and, other media personalities been pretty consistent on the anti-war. When Bush was in office, when Obama was in office, when Clinton was in office, tends to be the libertarians that tend to stay consistent on the anti-war. The libertarians tend to be the ones that are consistent on personal freedom, whether it leans right or left. Well, that personal freedom is something that the left enjoys, so since I'm right, I can't support that personal freedom. It's a personal freedom. You support them or you don't. And it's funny that how I've seen a lot come out of the Libertarian Party. It's very, it's either left or right leaning at points. And it's just not a big fan of the Libertarian Party at this point. I'm not a big party person, and again, I just haven't seen the candidate that I'd be willing to vote for run as a libertarian since Ron Paul. Now, there's been a few that I think have been somewhat closer than maybe a Gary Johnson to a libertarian philosophy. Let me bring up this article here. I wanted to cover this real quick. Hopefully, I don't have any problems. And of course, I got fans wanting to kick in overdrive on my computers here. Okay. Now, I have an article, more news related, and then also I have a must read here from Reason.com, the best books, films, music, and television of 2016. Let me get this article loaded up here. Okay. This is Texas is a model for a more libertarian, more diverse America. Now, I could play a clip, but I'm just going to read the short article part in here. In Texas, the Mexicans have always been there. There's not the sense that Mexicans are foreigners, says Avik Roy, Forbes opinion editor and the co-founder and president of the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity. Roy believes Texas, a majority-minority state, offers a good counterexample for libertarians and conservatives anxious about immigrants and non-Europeans changing American political culture. Lone Star State is not only doing very well economically, says Roy, there's a sense of inclusion that doesn't exist in many other states. It's not just a free state in the sense of policy, but there really is a sense that everyone feels, whether Anglo or Latino, that freedom has made their lives better, Roy tells Reason's Nick Gillespie. The indigenous thing called Tex-Mex has been around for a very long time. It's simply not treating the others as if they were others. That attitude makes a huge difference. According to Roy, who has advised politicians such as Rick Perry and Marco Rubio, one of the goals of the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity is to challenge the conservative view that holds racial and ethnic minority groups can only be appeased through more statism and redistribution and should thus be written off when it comes to building political and economic coalitions. Free markets have lifted more people out of poverty than anything that has been invented by man, says Roy. We don't usually talk about free markets in that way. And you can watch the full interview at reason.com. But, talking with other people, the fact got brought up that Texas is also one of the only states that has an independent power grid from the rest of the country. It literally could operate on its own power grid without any, needing assistance from others. Others don't have that opportunity. Many states are a shared power system. I can't remember how many there were for the rest of the country, and then Texas was on its own. But, being from Texas, I was born there. I didn't live there a long period of my life, but I do remember Texas, and it was very diverse. I remember being young and, Mexicans, I call them Americans, but Latino, Hispanic people. I remember Asian people. It really was diverse, and the economy in Texas has done very, very well for a long period of time. And that's why I was born in Texas, was because my parents had moved to Texas. Many of my friends' parents moved to Texas. There was like an exodus at one point to Texas, and there still tends to be a lot of people I know that have moved down to Texas at least and come back. And I know one person that plans on moving back to Texas. And it's not that, there is an opportunity here in Indiana. They said, Indiana is one of the better states. But Texas just has much more opportunity. So, again, Texas tends to have a lot going for it. And I do believe there's also a lot that other states really should learn from Texas. But we have way too much of a political game being played and a cultural, game being played. And it's happening on both sides, and neither side is right, because they're trying to not win the argument, but trash the other side. Now we finally have people going, well, we should come together now. Once Trump's president, we should just come together. I don't see that happening after how much hate has been spread, unless culture finally says, hey, we're done with the fighting and all that. I would like to see it, but will we? Okay, I want to get to a couple things here before the end of the broadcast. From Reason.com. This one, best books, films, music, and television of 2016. As the year drew to a close, we asked Reason's staff to select some of the best books, movies, and other media released in 2016. Our pick ranged from a novel about economic collapse to a sitcom about aliens, from a book about cocktails to a film about Hannah Arendt. Dig in, Jesse Walker. Eric Boehm, reporter with Painkillers, former Gaslight anthem singer Brian Fallon leads his Springsteen meets the replacement roots for a folksy rock exploration of failed relationships, nostalgic romances, and the freedom that comes with letting go of the past, even if you'll never be rid of it. You can't make me whole. I have to do that on my own. Fallon sings on the album's introspective closing number, a reference in equal parts to his recent divorce and the breakup of his band. The simple Americana arrangements here put Fallon's skills as a songwriter, and here's one of the best out there right now. I'm just going to name these off. Vita Activa, a documentary by the Israeli director Ada Utzfitz. Another one, Louis C.K., 30-minute sitcom with his FX show Louis. where the main character's backstory would change without explanation and where excruciating, painful situations could be both hilarious and cathartic. The War on Alcohol, W. Norton. If you're worried about how odd assortments of special interests can radically reshape the size, scope, and spending of government in a relatively short period of time, you need to read Lisa McGurr's The War on Alcohol, Foundation, and the Rise of the American State. People of Earth. The best new cable comedy of the 2016 is People of Earth, a TBS show about an alien abduction support group. Okay, sorry, there's 2 pages. Okay. The Mandibles isn't exactly light holiday reading. It's dystopian, literary fiction set during and after a near future economic apocalypse in which a global pissing match combined with overwhelming U.S. debt results in the dollar no longer being the global reserve currency. So yeah, not the feel-good book of the year. It is, however, a very good book of the year, and the reasons readers should almost certainly read it. And that's The Mandibles by author Lionel Shriver. Bates Motel on A&E. Westworld, HBO. And I've seen Westworld. That is very, very interesting. A proper drink. 30 years ago, when most American bars could barely mix a decent Manhattan, the World Cocktail referred to any fruity, sugary concoction tossed together behind a bar. Today, the country is in the midst of a full-scale craft cocktail revival. Lost drinks are being brought back into circulation for the first time in decades, and new classics are being invented by legions of knowledgeable and creative bartenders all over the country. The Americans on FX. Those are all pretty interesting. A lot of those I've seen or read or heard about, and I think that is a pretty good collection. I do want to check out the Mandibles. I think it was, yeah. That definitely sounded pretty interesting. From a lot of you heard about MTV's White Guy Resolutions 2017. It was pulled eventually, but the repercussions are still falling out about that. There is an article you can check out about how that might just earn Trump a second term, and check that out on Reason.com from Nick Gillespie. Okay. hopefully after New Year, I will have my new machine so I can get rid of all these problems I've been having. Upgrading here, again, that takes a little bit of money to do. Definitely the setup that I've created. Maybe I went a little overboard, but what I'm trying to do in the future is going to take a lot of computing power, and I'm trying to get all that together. My old system is going to be completely wiped and turned into a secondary system that's going to have certain programs on it so I can work a double system basically. And that will hopefully take care of a lot of the problems we have lately on this broadcast. Honestly, I think a lot of it has to do with a lot of the Windows updates that eventually came along, and because I am someone that clears my caches and all that stuff, so I shouldn't have as many problems as I am. Okay. Of course, this is still not wanting to load. Got an article I wanted to cover. Obama officially kills Bush-era Muslim registry program before Trump can resurrect it. It just doesn't want to load there. See it. Too slow of a response, or I'm grabbing the wrong article every time I try to click it. Here we go. He didn't close Guantanamo Bay, end American drone strikes on foreign countries, or roll back the surveillance operations created after 9/11. But less than a month before leaving office, President Barack Obama killed at least one civil liberties violation program from the George W. Bush era. The Obama administration on Thursday officially shuttered the National Security Entry-Exit Registration System, or NSEERS, from 2002 until 2011. NSEERS required visitors from 25 high-risk countries, 24 of them were in the Middle East. North Korea was the other, to register with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, undergo interrogations and fingerprinting when they entered the United States, and periodically check in at a government office while they were here. While it was operational, some 93,000 immigrants were put through the NSEERS program without a single one being convicted of any terrorism charges. The poor track record caused the Obama administration to put the NSEERS program into hibernation in 2011. Thursday's action, though somewhat symbolic because the program hasn't really existed for more than 5 years, was important because it makes it more difficult for the incoming Trump administration to resurrect NSEERS. As I wrote last month, members of Trump's transaction team were reportedly considering using the registration program as a way to meet Donald's campaign promise to implement extreme vetting for Muslim immigrants. Chris Kobach, Kansas Secretary of State and Immigration hardliner Hardner, who is serving on Trump's transition team, helped develop N-Sears as a member of Bush's Department of Justice. According to the New York Times, the White House's decision to end the registry is among the actions being taken in the final weeks of the administration that could prevent or at least slow what Democrats fear may be a swift rollback of President Obama's efforts on immigration and climate change. It's a shame that it took the threat of Donald Trump's inauguration for Obama to do away with the N-Series program. It was an abusive failure. According to the ACLU, N-Series singled out immigrant men and boys from designated countries for extraordinary registration requirements with DHS, ranging from an extra half hour of screening on arrival through tracking of whereabouts while in the United States to limitations on points of departure. The scale profiling was something not seen in the United States since the Japanese-American internment camps during World War II and Operation Wetback Deportations to Mexico in the 1950s. It's not hard to figure out why the program failed to identify any potential terrorists. It was by nature targeting only law-abiding immigrants as reasons. Shikaya or something, Mia wrote last year, expecting terrorists to voluntarily stroll to an immigration office to be fingerprinted and ID'd is absurd. So you could check that article out at reason.com, read the rest of it there. And that was titled Obama Officially Kills Bush-Era Muslim Registry Program Before Trump Can Resurrect It. Now, I think it's kind of absurd to think that would stop him. Could Donald Trump just write a new executive order? Or was it done in a way to maybe erase records? Again, lose situation. I think we can't be just creating extremists and then immigrating them into our society, nor do I believe in our government controlling borders. I think private property should be your borders. Hey, this is my property, don't cross the line. Now, we have Christmas right around the corner. If you don't celebrate Christmas, a different holiday, or you don't celebrate really as a religious holiday, any way you look at it, you know, we need to come together under really the most simplest of understandings. That everybody as an individual has the right to live their life as they choose, as long as they don't abridge the rights of others. And what are rights? Well, it's natural rights. You have the right to live your life as you choose, as long as you're not hurting others, abridging their rights, their property rights, or forcing them to adhere to your beliefs or your culture. But you don't have the right not to be offended. You have the right to be offended, but that doesn't mean you get to beat someone up, hurt them. Now, you could be offensive to them, but that doesn't give them the right to beat you. But if we want to live in a society where we can live our lives as we choose, maybe it's better we do it together.
Ozzy Scape.